It looks like something out of a Star Wars movie. It's called a taser gun, a non-lethal weapon for police officers. Many police departments, including the Birmingham Police Department, are experimenting with the new weapon, but only to be used in certain circumstances, and not as an alternative to the use of deadly force. The taser gun does have its advantages over the police service revolver in that used under controlled instances, it may prevent the serious wounding or death of a suspect. It fires two tiny electronic darts containing 50,000 volts of electricity and immediately immobilizes a person but does not kill him. The disadvantage to the taser gun is that it only has a firing range of 14 feet. Some police officers add that the weapon is not accessible enough because it could not be carried on their person, such as a revolver, and still others wonder about the longevity of the weapon. While some law enforcement officers are in favor of the taser gun, others are not, for different reasons. We asked Montgomery Mayor Emery Farmer his opinion of the non-lethal weapon.
Well, I think that there may be a possibility that they would have some value in a very limited situation. I don't think it is practical to risk the life of a police officer while you try to get in position to put this dart in him that may or may not immobilize him. I'll always continue to look at better ways to do things, and we'll certainly keep an eye on this. But at the moment, no, we're not going to use it.
Whether or not the taser gun will become a successful law enforcement tool remains to be seen. But in the meantime, a lot of police suspects across the country will be participating in the taser gun experiment by being zapped rather than being shot. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Alabama's unemployment rates are typically higher than national figures. The state has quite a few industries affected by the nation's weakening economy. Industries like steel plants, tire plants, those that produce textiles and apparels, and the construction industry. Each has laid off record numbers of workers and are expected to continue to reduce the labor force in the months ahead. Unemployment figures for May haven't been released yet, but state officials estimate unemployment claims will rise 20% over April figures.
At the moment, we don't see any indication of a major improvement in the economy. State-wise, we're really dependent on pickup in major industries, and they are the automotive industry, which is certainly having its problems. As inflation decreases, we'll see an increase in buying, but at the moment there's no strong evidence that inflation is coming down to a point that will spur retail buying, which will have its effect on the textile and apparel industry and other hard goods manufacturers, apart from, say, the automotive industry.
Davis says one positive point is that the construction industry should pick up soon as more people take advantage of lower interest rates. Still more good news is that the labor force in Montgomery should continue to be more stable than other parts of the state and nation, especially since state government offices are located here and the city is a regional trade and service center. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Montgomery Police Chief Charles Swindle has said his officers have more important responsibilities than to worry with those stores that may or may not be breaking the blue law. He said it's up to the legislature to enforce the law, or in effect change it or repeal it. We decided to ask two Montgomery legislators their opinion of the blue law and what should or should not be done to make it more enforceable.
I think for the necessity drugstores and things of this sort, certainly that serve human needs should be open. But I'm not for all the stores that are open now being open on Sunday.
My personal feeling is that really probably wasn't any use in this law in the beginning. Now, I'm perhaps one of the most conservative members of the legislature, but I see this maybe as an infringement on people's constitutional rights. I may be wrong, but I think that this would be a place where separation of church and state ought to be observed.
And I think that the legislature should take it under consideration in the next legislative session or even the special session that the governor called.
And so I think whatever the people really want, the most of the people want on this issue, I'd be satisfied with.
Would you be willing? For many months now, several grocery and discount stores have been operating on Sunday. Some store managers told us it's a matter of providing better customer service, while another says it's a matter of losing business and a lot of money to another store if his store is not open on Sunday. So for now, it looks as though the stores that have been operating on Sunday will continue to do so until a change is made in the blue law. And right now, no one knows when that will be. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
For the last 6 months, Alabama Power Company has been arguing before the PSC that it needs $123 million in higher rates. Also, the utility lawyers have appealed the $208 million increase granted them last year by the PSC to the state Supreme Court. The utility wants all of the $288 million it asked for last year. The Attorney General's office also appealed the $208 million rate increase to the Supreme Court, but charging it was too high. This year's proposed settlement includes an agreement that the power company and the Attorney General's office would withdraw last year's appeals. It would also set at $73 million the amount of an increase to be granted in the current $123 million rate increase request. The Commission will be studying the proposal most of this week. Although 80 to 90% of the hearings on the current request are complete, officials say their time and effort wasn't wasted because the Commission will weigh evidence taken in these proceedings. Never has a settlement proposed by all of the parties negotiated a rate increase. Some state sources say it raises questions about the credibility of the power company's rate increase request. Why would the power company settle for $73 million after arguing for $123 million? Those same sources say it's a change in the management utility's philosophy. But the power company contends they need money now, and a settlement would attain that end. If it is a philosophy change, it could come back to haunt the power company. What if the PSC rejects the proposal? The power company might then have problems going back and arguing for the original $123 million figure. The PSC says it wants until June 19th to decide on the proposal. The power company says it has no objections. Between now and then, the PSC will continue hearings into the structure of the rates. These hearings will look into possible special rates for the elderly and how any rate increase would be distributed among the various forms of power customers. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
This conference.
Dr. Teague asked a conference of educators and education-associated representatives what they considered to be the most important needs in education and to make those needs known during 2 days of meetings. Teague says business and lay people, school associations, chambers of commerce, and learning institutions can contribute valuable information. And he urged the conference not to underestimate their contributions in identifying education trouble spots.
I'm optimistic that we can renew and improve education in our state, even in the face of dwindling resources, crisis in confidence, and other adversities. I believe then that you should have a question worth addressing, that you are the group to address it. And I want to assure you that your answers and responses will be used. Collective wisdom.
The results of the two-day conference will be used by the Southeast Regional Council for Education Improvement and the Appalachian Education Laboratory in designing education needs. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
But why?
He went to a non-popular war. He never did receive the support the American public gave all the veterans of other wars. The World War II veteran came home a hero. World War I veterans were heroes. So was the Korean veteran. The Vietnam era veteran came home to peace demonstrations, and he was a drug-crazed killer. The people didn't accept him back into society. He came home to a high rate of unemployment, and the VA educational system that was inadequate to meet his needs. So the Vietnam era veteran has been slighted, we feel.
Billy Black says more Vietnam veterans have committed suicide than the number of Americans killed in the Vietnam War, and that suicide rate has increased in the past 3 years. So Black says Vietnam-era veterans need an outreach program to help them readjust. The program tells Vietnam vets where they can go for help with employment, education, and money problems, and places a strong emphasis on psychological counseling. The office is at 500 South Hull Street, away from the Veterans Administration, because Black says many Vietnam vets have developed a distrust of federal agencies. He stresses that the outreach program is not a federal agency and says that's one reason Vietnam veterans feel they can trust it. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
The new appraisal will affect all residential, commercial, business, and industrial property. Excluded from the program are local, county, and state-owned lands, as well as church, school, and charitable organization property. The Department of Revenue's letter stipulates that all property will be appraised according to its fair market value as of October 1st, 1980. The Revenue Department expects the 2-year appraisal program to cost only $10 million. That's a far cry from the more than $40 million spent hiring private firms to conduct the state's 1971 appraisal program. The reason for that potential savings in state funds is the fact that county employees, not private firms, will do the appraisal work.
Nobody knows any better of what more property is worth than the county appraiser and county tax assessor.
And for all you property owners who are already having negative thoughts about the appraisal, think positive. When this new appraisal becomes effective, you'll be paying ad valorem taxes that are 2 years old, even though the value of your land will continue to increase. Sydney Kohara, WSFA TV News.
On October 19, 1979, Nat Wilkins held a news conference in which he accused West Point of concealing medical information that indicated that he suffered from brown lung. And because of the alleged fraud by the company, Wilkins says he couldn't apply for workman's compensation, ultimately was forced to retire because of failing health, and now receives only Social Security benefits. But Judge Gullidge granted West Point Pepperell's motion to dismiss the case, saying the incident is covered under the Workmen's Compensation Act. Richard Monk, the general counsel for West Point Pepperell, says they're obviously pleased about the ruling, but want to wait until they can look at it before they make any further comment. The officials here at Southern Poverty Law Center say that they're not surprised or disappointed by the ruling. They say it will help them get into the appellate courts where they can get at the meat of the problem.
Instead of having a lengthy trial and discovery process, we're going to get right to the heart of the legal issues quicker and in the appellate courts, and that's where this issue is going to have to be decided anyway. So.
The appeal will be made to the Civil Appeals Court, but Judge Gullidge left room in his ruling if Wilkins' attorneys decide not to appeal. Judge Gullidge gave them 60 days to change their suit into a workman's compensation case, or if they appeal and lose, they'll have 30 days from that appellate ruling to try for a workman's compensation suit. Southern Poverty lawyers will have 6 weeks to decide if they want to appeal. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Criminal charges against Turner were dismissed at a preliminary hearing in May. So Turner's lawyer, Maurice Bell, says he's disappointed that the Personnel Board upheld the dismissal. He says the city has convicted Turner without a trial. The board's decision says that in light of evidence produced at a hearing last week, the board believes Turner engaged in behavior cited in the city's personnel handbook as conduct prejudicial to departmental reputation, order, or discipline. Bell says that policy is vague, that Turner was really fired for having been charged with criminal activities. Bell says he thinks Turner's case has received too much publicity and that public opinion or some other pressure influenced the Personnel Board because the attorney says the decision is contrary to the American system of justice. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
James says the 13-member task force composed of representatives of education as well as private citizens has been asked to complete its study on reforms in higher education within 90 to 120 days. He says he'll take the task force recommendations to the legislature, who must then consider any reform programs. The task force includes, among others, Finance Director Sid McDonald, Superintendent of Education Wayne Teague, Hanley Funderburk, President of Auburn University, and University of Alabama Chancellor Joseph Volker. Governor James says he's hopeful the gap between the state legislature and Board of Education can be bridged, and that's why he's wanted the House Speaker and Lieutenant Governor as part of the board. In other business, the board adopted a resolution allowing Athens College to offer four-year degree opportunities to technical college instructors, and it hopes to designate the second Tuesday and fourth Thursday of each month as regular meeting days for the board. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
There are over 600 girls under age 19 every year in Montgomery County who give birth, and that's quite a high rate.
More than 100 people packed the council chambers as actions by the Community Development Program were discussed. Questions ranged from loans and grants to drainage and proposed parks. Discussion of the program became heated when District 6 Councilman Donald Watkins was critical of some program funding. He called for a stop to the abuse of certain allocations, which he says takes money from the poor. Montgomery Mayor Emery Fulmer was quick to answer Watkins' criticisms, saying the projects were eligible or HUD wouldn't have sent the funds. No 1980 funds were discussed because HUD hasn't released the money to fund this year's local projects. More than $23 million should have been released last February, but HUD disagrees with the city on allocations to some city projects and is withholding the money. Sidney Kohara, WSFA TV News.
Forbes magazine is a summary of financial happenings around the nation, normally confining itself to the ups and downs of the money market. But in the July issue, Forbes takes space on its pages to praise the man who some have referred to as the Ayatollah Bronner, Dr. David Bronner, loved by some and hated by others. Writer Thomas O'Donnell has nothing but nice things to say about Bronner, who heads up the state's dual retirement systems. O'Donnell writes of phenomenal investment moves by Bronner, which O'Donnell says are envied by the prestigious Wall Street brokers. O'Donnell writes that Bronner is responsible for the success of the retirement system of Alabama, not through any secret formula for investing, but rather through a feel for the money market. Bronner says he's surprised about the flattery in the article, but is humble in his own way about the effects the story will and has brought about.
There's been a number of articles for decades about Alabama being 47th or 48th or 49th and everything, and it was just a good sign, a good pleasure to have national recognition for the state on a different level.
Bronner says positive response from the major investing firms is already coming in.
Of course, you get a lot of quack calls. We always get those anyway, and we've certainly got a lot of them since that article came out. Of somebody with a hot deal in Chicago or a hot deal in Los Angeles or a hot deal someplace. But I think a lot of the major firms that had not been paying attention to this account, they either had what I would consider a second or third-rate salesman on the account, not showing us their best merchandise from one of the best Wall Street firms. When the senior partners of that firm read of our activity, they then get excited and say, why haven't you done more business with the state of Alabama?
When I asked other state officials about the article, they'd chuckle, but wouldn't comment on its accuracy, but at the same time wouldn't argue the facts of success claimed in the story. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
The state has already processed some 820,000 tax refunds, and at a rate of about 7,000 checks a day, most refunds should be in the mail by June 30th. The chief of the Income Tax Division says his office is right on time with the refunds, that they're well within the 90-day response requirement. But still, he's received some calls from worried taxpayers.
There's a lot of publicity in the paper about the shortage of funds, schools being in proration and what have you. And so they're assuming that there is a shortage of funds for paying refunds, which is not the case.
Bradshaw says he's in constant communication with the state's controller so that as income tax revenue comes in, enough will be on hand to pay refunds before the remaining money goes to the Special Education Trust Fund. Bradshaw stresses that refunds have first priority, so they will be made even though education money is being prorated. All in all, the state will end up paying an estimated $120 million in refunds for 1979, an average of $128 for every person who's getting a refund. That's up $19 per person from 1978. Bradshaw says one reason for the increase is Hurricane Frederick, which caused a drop in anticipated income. Another reason is that more people are jobless, making the state's estimates of how much tax a worker would have paid inaccurate. And if unemployment continues climbing, Bradshaw says the state could owe even more in refunds next year. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
The committee projects by 1984 the state of Alabama will have an abundance of diploma and associate degree RNs, but a shortage of baccalaureate and higher degree nurses. It says there will be an oversupply of active and practicing LPNs, but a shortage of active and practicing registered nurses. To counteract this, the commission suggests no new nursing programs at any level be approved unless there is documented need and student demand. The committee says the shortage of nurses must be recognized as the responsibility of the health care system as well as the educational system, and that the existing baccalaureate and higher degree nursing programs should make every effort to increase enrollment. Information on the racial ethnic minority background of registered nurses in Alabama is incomplete. However, the committee recognizes that racial and ethnic minorities are underrepresented in health programs in colleges and universities throughout the state. The findings by the Advisory Committee on Nursing Education are not conclusive. The report is a preliminary draft drawn up by the committee. It was sent to various post-secondary institutions and nursing programs for comment. The final draft will be submitted to the Alabama Commission on Higher Education. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
That's 100 feet, Billy. That's all you call it common. Give me a car.
Reputable company.
Allen says the only protection Alabama consumers can currently look to is old common law action for deceit or fraud, which places the burden of proof on the consumer. He says under the oil law, his office is handicapped, but with the passage of a Consumer Protection Act, his staff could be much more effective. However, this past legislative session was the 9th time the measure failed to pass. We asked Allen why.
The reason is that it just does not have a high enough priority, and the constituents of the different areas, if they would talk to their people and tell them that they want a higher priority and to make them aware for the need of it, I believe it was just not in the priorities this past time.
Allen says his office is going to initiate a public awareness program to solicit support, which will in turn let members of the legislature know just how important they consider the passage of the proposed consumer protection to be. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Information we have on those.
At first glance, this field of corn appears to be thriving, but a closer look shows that quite a few corn stalks are drying up because of the lack of rain. In Montgomery County, crops most affected by the drought are soybeans, peas, beans, and squash. After inspecting several fields this morning, County Agent Coordinator Andre Bryant says the situation is critical.
Because you can see the corn in the background is rolling up, and we got some vegetable crops that are beginning to get in pretty bad shape. And some of we don't have the soybeans up yet, some of them up to a good stand. So we're right in a very serious condition, I would say.
Bryant says any amount of rain will help the soybean crop, but a large amount is needed to save the vegetables. Some farmers are turning to irrigation to try and save their crops. Bryant says few can afford irrigation because it's so expensive. That leaves a large number of farmers dependent on the rain. There's no great amount of rain expected for the Montgomery County area. Only a few afternoon thunder showers. Bryant says if there's no extensive rainfall within the next week or so, farmers may be in danger of losing their crops. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The executive order raising the income ceiling from $421 a month to $482 each month affects Medicaid recipients in nursing homes who will receive a cost of living increase in Social Security July 1st.
The situation in which we find ourselves here in Alabama today, we're confronted with 14.3% increase in Social Security benefits effective July 1. Governor James has agreed to increase the ceiling for nursing home eligibility to $482, or an increase of 14.3% over the existing ceiling. Had he failed to do this, we could have had a situation where 240 or 50 nursing home patients would have suddenly become ineligible in Alabama, and Governor James has increased the ceiling to accommodate the needs of those persons.
In approving the amendment to the state's Medicaid plan, Governor James says increases in Social Security benefits should not force a person out of a nursing home. Last year, when a 9% cost of living increase in Social Security benefits took effect, some 185 nursing home patients lost eligibility before James raised the income ceiling. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
The two families came to the American Embassy in an attempt to accept an invitation to come to the United States and settle in Selma, Alabama. But the Russian government won't let them immigrate, and the families must remain at the embassy, for to leave the guarded quarters would mean instant arrest by Soviet officials. But their plight hasn't gone unnoticed. The Siberian Seven is a book written about the family's 20-year fight against religious persecution. A copy of it, along with a sweater knitted from Alabama yarn by Maria Shimakahalov, was presented to Governor Fob James for his efforts toward helping the families. Concerned Alabamians like Reverend Cecil Williamson of Selma and Mrs. Janie Drake, who made the presentations, work with an organization called SAVE, the Society of Americans for Vashenko Immigration. Mrs. Drake says it's impossible to predict when the Vashenkos and Shimakahalovs will be allowed to immigrate to the U.S. and Selma. But there is some optimistic news. With the Olympics taking place in Moscow next month, Mrs. Drake says the Soviets will be under a lot of pressure to release the Siberian Seven. Sydney Kohara, WSFA TV News.
Donna and Dyke are the 1979 sophomore regional dance champions. They have moved up to the junior division for this year's competition. Donna and Dyke have been skating as a team for 2.5 years. Sally and Richard have been together as a team for 1.5 years. Richard commutes from Atlanta to Montgomery for practice every Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday. Brian Wheaton, a former two-time national senior dance champion who now lives in Selma, coaches both dance teams, and he's the one to ask about their different dance style.
Well, Sally and Richard are they thrive on the unison. They much better matching team. They're a better physical match. They're a very striking team and a very smooth team. This is good, but they lack in a little bit of the power, which is their only real weakness. Donner and Dyke are just the opposite. They're a much more wide-open team. They skate fast, they skate crisp, and the physical match that they have, she's a little shorter than he is, so we had to go to this wide-open style.
You've been working with both couples for quite a while, is that right? How long have you been working with them?
Well, I've been working with Donner and Dyke for 2 years now, and I've been working with Sally and Richard since September.
Brian, what's the difference now between the pair skating and the dance skaters that we see here?
Well, in pairs, you're unlimited to what you can do as far as movements. A team can lift a girl over his head and whatever, and they can jump. Whereas in dance, you have set patterns where these patterns are established years ago, and these teams are required to do these intricate pieces of footwork. So every team has to do the same dance, so therefore you get a better comparison over the strengths and weaknesses of the teams. It's much harder to hide the weaknesses.
Now, there's a possibility that roller skating in general would become an Olympic sport. Is that right?
Yes, sir. They've been talking about it for a number of years, and we got in the Pan Am Games the last time around, and it was rumored that we were going to be able to get into this one a few years back, but hopefully they're talking about the next one, and we have our organization all set up to where we can get into the United States Olympic Committee with no problem.
For now, Sally and Richard and Donna and Dyke are concentrating on the regionals. The first, second, and third place teams in the event will advance to the national championships in Lincoln, Nebraska. That'll be held July 26th. And the winners will go on to the World Championships. A brand new skating season starts September 1st.
Most important of all is planning, making a list around the grocery store specials and sticking to that list. And above all, be sure not to shop on an empty stomach. You'll find you'll buy several items you don't need just because you're hungry. With today's high beef prices, chickens and turkeys are an especially good buy. One turkey can yield several meals. The larger the bird, the lower the cost per serving. And of course, you save on chicken by buying whole chickens and cutting them up yourself. Vegetable and fruit purchases are difficult to be specific about because prices can vary widely from week to week and from store to store. But it's good to keep in mind that when you buy fresh produce in the supermarket, prepackaged fruits and vegetables almost always cost less than loose ones. About eggs. There's no nutritional difference between grade A and grade B eggs. Large eggs tend to be more abundant and lower in cost in the spring. Medium, a better buy in the fall. If the difference in price is 7 cents or more, you'll save on the medium size. Single-serving boxes of cereal cost 3 times as much as the economy size, and when you buy pre-sweetened cereals, you pay more. The price goes sky high when you buy cereals flavored with brown sugar, raisins, dried fruits, and other flavorings. It's cheaper to add your own. For hot cereals, the difference between instant and quick cooking is about 5 minutes and about 50 cents a pound in cost. Other staples like coffee, sugar, and flour should always be bought in economical large sizes. You get more for your money. Here are some other savings ideas to keep in mind. A frozen dinner can cost up to 65% more than one prepared at home. Mixed pancakes cost about 20% more than scratch, and cake mixes about 74% more than cakes from scratch. Being a money-saving consumer takes a little time, effort, and creativity, but it's well worth the effort. If you'd like some more information, you can write Consumer Product Information, Public Documents Distribution Center, Pueblo, Colorado, 81009. This is Coping, and I'm Ivy Berman.
Tonight. Can I come back? Go ahead. Yeah. I'll be on TV.
What's he doing, taking a picture?
Oh, yes. Well, play a little dominoes for us. Let's get started.
Somebody come in mine, just ask them to come down here and play. I say, look at that screen, I was getting in my hand, all this kind of work. What's he doing, taking a picture? And I played him up here. You have to put it in there. And all you need to do is put it. There you go. And it has a different look at water. So now you take the put.
State nursing officials like the report. They say this kind of study has been needed for years. The report issued 3 specific mandates: to continue the development of a projection model for determining the supply and demand for registered and practical nurses in the state, to conduct a review of existing nursing programs, and to consider the racial ethnic minority mix of nurses.
One particular part of the report that we like is that there be no net increase in the schools of nursing. It's very important that there be documented need for additional nursing programs and that there's adequate funding. Quality is the name of the game.
The report predicts that by 1984 there will be too few nurses with baccalaureate degrees and too many licensed practical nurses. West says she hopes more students will decide to get a higher degree, but she says long hours and low salaries don't provide much incentive.
You do have to want to do it. You have to love nursing.
Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Commission President Jimmy Sanford made a motion to accept the settlement, but no one seconded it. Instead, the other 2 commissioners suggested 10 more working days be given to the commission rate analyst to verify facts in the proposal. The power company says no way.
So what we will do now is just go back to the rate case. We will vigorously pursue this rate case, and we are seeking the entire $122 million.
When the hearing began, PSC rate hearings analyst Yvette Smith said parties to the settlement were asking her staff to verify in a few days what had taken months to negotiate.
Staff is of the opinion that this constitutes either a supreme insult or a supreme compliment for the staff.
Mrs. Smith told the commission that although her staff wasn't rejecting the proposal, there hasn't been time to verify the figures independently. Sanford called the proposal a positive stride and said approving it would have been a possible savings of $130 million in rates for Alabama Power customers. So why haven't the power company officials given the PSC more time to study the settlement?
Each day of a delay, I don't have the dollar figure on what that does, but it is extremely costly. It's in the millions of dollars to wait even 10 days.
All of the parties involved haven't closed the door on the possibility of a new figure and a new settlement. But with a deadline of July 28th, they say those possibilities are slim. So Monday morning, it's back to the hearing room and continued arguments on the original request. At the PSC, Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
A lot of emotion filled the education meeting room, but for once, board members weren't debating issues. Instead, they were expressing gratitude for having had the chance to work with Garrett. All agreed it will be difficult to find a new superintendent who will foster Garrett's ideas and carry on the system. Garrett took over the superintendent's duties almost 8 years ago and played an integral part of many system changes.
One is a significant improvement in the instructional program as revealed by the recent test scores, and secondly, the accreditation of all of our schools.
Although Garrett will relinquish his duties August 21st, he'll be retained until January 1st as consultant to the new superintendent. Sydney Kohara, WSFA TV News.
Siegelman says a $30,000 federal grant will help the state smooth out its election process. He says the Office of Public Service and Research at Auburn University will help to prepare training handbooks he hopes to have in circulation in late July.
Well, we're planning on having between 7 and 14 regional meetings to conduct the actual training sessions. And we will be gearing the training programs both to county election officials and to those people who actually will be at the polls on Election Day. What has happened in the past is that problems would occur, such as someone would come into the polling place and their name would not be on the voting list, and election official would not know that their duty was to call the courthouse to find out whether or not that person was indeed a registered voter.
Siegelman says Alabama's election equipment needs to be updated and poll workers need to be paid more. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
The chlorine was discovered leaking from a storage tank inside this pump house adjacent to the camp pool. The liquid chemical is used for water purification. According to a fire department spokesman, the leak was caused by a faulty gasket on the tank, which allowed the chlorine gas to escape. The leak was discovered at about 10:30 by a camp counselor who was overcome by his exposure to the gas. He, along with 10 others at the camp, were taken to University